Welcome to Tracking Looted Art with Wikidata Queries. I'm going to be sharing some tips how you can use Wikidata queries to research Nazi looted art. So why is Wikidata so interesting for tracking Nazi looted art? Well, first of all, it contains all of the items or entities from any Wikipedia language. And so marginalized people stand a much better chance of existing in Wikidata than they do in, for example, the English language Wikipedia. And then there is the incredible Sum of All Paintings projects, which has nearly 1 million paintings from hundreds of different institutions from all over the world in Wikidata. People have been adding key properties for Holocaust and art research in Wikidata, and it now has a fabulous library of these external identifiers that connect out to other databases with additional information. This graph structure is absolutely ideal for tracking complex hidden networks over long periods of time. The goal of this workshop is to familiarize you with key concepts and key properties necessary for tracking looted art. It's to look at how we can use information in Wikidata about dynasties and social and business networks over long periods of time in order to formulate queries that will give us useful information, and how to always ask what else, who else is involved. We'll look at a library of queries that are specifically created to help with Nazi looted art, and how to modify them for your specific needs, either manually or with the help of AI. And we'll speak a little bit about when to download the results of a query and analyze them in other tools or with filters. We'll look at some data visualizations, both standard and with AI, and we'll look at how we can verify entire museum collections. Throughout, what we're looking at is patterns, connections, and hidden relations. So the first key property is art looting red flag names. And in fact, it's not one property. It's a combination of investigated by and art looting investigation unit. Well, what is the art looting investigation unit? It was a subsection of the Monuments Men composed of just a few investigators who wrote reports in 1945 and 1946 detailing the network of people involved in trading Nazi looted art. This report was published and contains a brief paragraph for each of 1,000 names. And so we're talking about the red flag names, we're talking about the red flag names that appeared in this report. And the thing about Wikidata is it contains more of these names than any other resource, more than Proviana, more than Ulan, more than DNB, more even than BF. It's a very easy query to do. With the query builder, for example, all we're going to do is put in investigated by art looting investigation unit, which was actually part of the Office of Strategic Services. And when I get these names, this query gives you all of the red flag names that are in Wikidata. And that's 260 names. Which paintings came through these red flag names? And you can do a simple query. And this query looks at paintings that are owned by someone who was investigated by the Art Looting Investigation Unit. We have some 3,000 results. And this can be presented as a table or, of course, as a graph. Now, when you see one of these graphs like this, which is sometimes derisively referred to as a hairball, what that means is that you have a lot of very interesting information. It's very rich information, and you can, of course, download that into a CSV file. And it's very easy to share this with a short link. I can share either the query or the results, so it can be shared when you have an interesting query. So what do we do with that information? Well, I would suggest that when you have a hairball like that, you import it into a tool that interests you. This is the query that we used. These are the results of the query. And then you can start analyzing it, for example, with pivot tables to look at the red flag names that are associated with the most artworks in Wikidata, or also extremely interesting, the collections, which are associated with the most artworks that pass through red flag names. Remember, this is a small section of the overall data. This is just what's in Wikidata. Or you can take this file that you've downloaded and upload it into other tools, including into AI, which we'll see a little bit later. Now, if you wanted to look at just one museum, let's say, for example, that I wanted to look at artworks that pass through, that had red flag names that pass through just the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston. I'll take the first one there, take a look at it. So this is in the Museum of Fine Arts of Boston, and in fact, there are several red flag names. Fritz Nathan is a red flag name. Raphael Gérard is a red flag name as well. If we want to get to the provenance, we have an identifier which can be used to go directly to the museum, which will give us the museum provenance. So this is just one of the many properties that's interesting when you're researching Nazi-looted art. There are, when I did this table, which was a couple of years ago, there were already 355 different identifiers for artworks, including museum identifiers. And concerning the Holocaust, you had Yad Vashem identifiers and many others that were very interesting. And in events, you had events linked to the Holocaust like Aryanization, Nazi plunder, claim for restitution of artwork. And in professions, you had art collectors, dealers, art historians, and of course you have the concept of owners and many other very useful properties. So another very important concept is the concept of persecuted Jewish collectors. One way you could look at them is, for example, to look at people who died in Nazi concentration or extermination camps. This is the result of the query that you see up there, where you see art collectors who died in Auschwitz or Theresienstadt. But that, of course, is not the only way you could look. There are many ways to look for persecuted Jewish collectors in Wikidata. One is to look at subjects has role, Holocaust victim. Another is professions, art dealers, collectors, museum directors, restorers, which are associated with a significant event of Aryanization or a claim for restitution of artwork. Another is to look at described by source, and the specific source, Jewish collectors and art dealers, victims of Nazi persecution and expropriation. So if, for example, I look at this last one, I'll see that, first of all, you can see all I did to get this list is described by source. Okay, and you can see that there are 40 results there. And the interesting question is, for each of these queries, what artworks did they own? This is one based on significant events. And who else was involved in owning these artworks? Here's one for subject has role, Holocaust victim. Now you can see 64. So each one of these queries is giving you slightly different results. And what's interesting is to take the union of all of these queries. This is what if you're using the query builder, what subject has role Holocaust victim looks like. You wouldn't just put subject has role Holocaust victim because then it's enormous. You would look at specific occupations like art collector and art dealer together with subject has role. This is simply the query described by source. And so if we take this query, described by source, and the source is Jewish collectors and dealers. Okay. Let's say I'm curious to know who else has referenced these. Like if I look at Proviana, how many of these people have Proviana IDs? Not that many. If I look at DNB, that's already much better, but still, it's not very many. And if I look at VOP, so we'd like to know of these persecuted Jewish art collectors, which artworks did they own and their families, because it might not be their name, it might be their entire family, and where are those artworks today? So we'll just take Holocaust victims. Run this query. You can see occupation, very important, the occupation, art dealer, art collector, and with this structure where we can put in Wikipedia entity IDs, we can add other occupations if we want, okay? So we're saying people who had this occupation or these occupations who had the role of being Holocaust victims. And we want to know which artworks they owned and which collections these artworks are found in. So we can run this query, and of course we can view it in all of the different ways that Wikipedia can view it. But this is one of those cases where it can be interesting to export the data to do more analysis. This is a data visualization done by Chat GPT based on data uploaded from Wikidata. So it's a Wikidata query that produced a CSV file, uploaded into Chat with a simple prompt for doing a data visualization. And in this you'll see the owners, art collectors who were murdered in the Holocaust, artworks that they owned. You see the edge there, owned, and then where that artwork ended up. You'll see the museums that had or still have these artworks today. Another way one can research is to look at a specific person and get all of the artworks that that person owned, and then look at who the other people that artwork passed through and what else they owned, with the idea that people who dealt in artwork that had belonged to Holocaust victims, there might be a pattern. Maybe there are other artworks. So for example, if we run this query, this is, what are we looking at? Owned by Max Silberberg. And then we're saying, show us the other owners as well. So these are artworks that Max Silberberg owned before he was murdered by the Nazis. And things appear several times because they're appearing each time for each owner. And we can graph this as well. And there are many ways, many things we could focus on. We can focus on the other owners, we can focus on the collectors. While Wikidata provides very good graphics here, it can be interesting to go a little bit further. Like, for example, let's see, this is a Wikidata query that's going to help us see the collections where Max Silverberg's paintings ended up. So what you see at the center is Max Silverberg, then it goes owned by, and that's the artwork. And there's a number of pieces of information about that artwork. One of them is that this one, for example, was at the MNR. It was at the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Rouen. It was at the Musée d'Orsay. This one, Peasant Girl with a Dog, was at Cleveland Museum of Art. This one is at the Louvre. These are all paintings owned by Max Silverberg. Here you have Lake Thun and Stockhorn Mountains, which was in the Simone and Charlotte Frick collection. Here you have the Rock of Otis Pierre, which is at the Art Institute of Chicago, and so on. Now, if you don't feel that the Wikidata data visualization is clear enough, you can export that same data. This is a Wikidata query that is just fed into AI with instructions to make it clearer. So in this one, this is basically the same information as before, but you see Max Silverberg at the center, the artworks in yellow, the name of the artwork, and the collections where they appear in green, for example. A week or two ago, I did a post about artworks that were owned by artworks by Schiele that were owned by Holocaust victims, and I just want to show how simple this query actually is. The key Wikidata properties for this query are created by P170, owned by P127, and subject has role P2868. And the key Wikidata entities are Egon Schiele, that's the artist, and Holocaust victim. And the query simply goes, created by Egon Schiele and owned by someone who is a Holocaust victim. This question of what else and who else is essential to get to the patterns. And one can do that from any starting point. One can do that from red flag names. One can do that from persecuted Jewish collections. One can do that from restitution claims. And it's always the same process. You start with one thing. For example, say you have a restitution claims, and you look at the artworks in the restitution claims, who the owners and dealers were, and what else these owners and dealers owned. Once again, to query builder, because I think it's clearer. So say that we're interested in restitution claims. We can say, so I'm going to say topic, claim for restitution. I would also put, frankly, and we also want or a significant event. It's another way of looking at it. Claim for restitution. If I had more time, I'd also be adding restitutions and settlements. Add another one, depicts. Claim for restitution, and maybe I'll add one that's the topic is restitution, not saluted art. Each time I'm putting or, which means I want all of these. And I think what you see is that these are all kinds of different. Let's add type. Type is instance of. Okay. So if if we look, we see we have linked to claims museums and art collections and art museums and lots of humans. And some of the people linked to claims are the victims, and some of the people linked to claims are names in between, like Frederick Mott and Eberhard Kornfeld, and some are red flag names. We can then go much further in analyzing these information about restitutions and restitution claims. But the information doesn't even have to be in Wikidata. So for example, let's take a restitution claim that was in Christie's, and you often find restitutions in the auction houses. So this Brock was restituted to Alphonse Kahn's estate in 1947, but what you see is a number of names that appear in the provenance between the time it was confiscated by the ERR and the time it was restituted. So in this case, I don't have a natural way of grouping them, so I'll just list them. Values, owners, Rochlitz, Wendland, Brechonsky, Fischer, Boehmer, Rosengart, Raber, Fritz here, because they were simply all these names in between. And let's now look to see what else these people owned. So see, these are some of the artworks, at least the ones that are known to Wikidata, that passed through these people who were involved in selling the looted George Brock. And if we look at the graph of these, we can quickly get a picture of other artworks that they were involved in. And because they were involved in selling at least one looted painting, this Brock, it is very natural to say, let us check the other paintings that they were involved in selling. We can use the same approach for erroneous provenance. Everything that we did in this main subject, property, etc., instead of claim, we could say, let's look at erroneous provenance. And once again, get things that are linked to erroneous provenances. I'm just going to add again what that type is. So we see what kinds of Wikidata items are linked to erroneous provenances. And you see it's all kinds of things. You have news articles and art exhibitions, and oh, there's a coffin. That's not Nazi looted art, that's looted antiquity. Humans, and of course many, many, many paintings. And it's very interesting to see the patterns in artworks that have erroneous provenances, because these things do not write themselves. Someone has to write an erroneous provenance. And so the next step in researching this would be to say, who were the authors of these erroneous provenances, and what other provenances did they write, and are those provenances erroneous, or are they correct? So how do we work with restitutions? To recap, we start with a claim, we ask who dealt with those and what other artworks they owned, and we repeat. So for example, in the Cel Greco, which is a spectacular example of also erroneous provenance for something that was looted, these are the people who it passed through after it was seized by the Gestapo. We will just focus on a couple of them. Frederick Mott and the gallery he owned, St. Lucas Gallery. Very simple query, owned by either Frederick Mott or St. Lucas, and it will give us this kind of graph. And what's interesting here is to go further and see when we see the names of the owners attached to these artworks, who are they? What are they in relationship to the Holocaust? And so here you can see red flags mark red flag names, and the yellow flag marks the victim. Now, we can do the query modified so that we see the status red flag name. So these are people, these are artworks that pass through Mont or his gallery with the other owners, and what the status of these various people were. You hear red flag names, Jewish collectors, members of the Nazi Party, and so on. So there's really no reason why you can't know who somebody was in a provenance in relation to the Holocaust, because the information is very probably in Wikidata. Now this takes a query from Wikidata and simply with the help of AI makes it a little bit easier to understand, where you see the red flag names that are associated with Mont and his gallery in the ownership circles. Now, very often the name that we see in a provenance is a family member in a long chain or in a dynasty or in a business relationship. And the flag name that we're looking for might not be the one in the provenance, it might be a relation to the one in the provenance. And so it's important to be able to look at dynasties, social and business networks over long periods of time. And there are many ways to do this. The first is simply a query, and I've taken a pretty simple one here, where we're looking at art dealers, their children, their mothers, and their fathers. When we would be looking at a dynasty, we would want to see all of them, because we don't know in whose name it's going to be done. And a good way to do this is with Entitree. So I'm going to take, for example, Hugo Pearls, who's an art dealer, and who had basically a dynasty, art dealing dynasty. And the automatic setting here is on family tree, but you can also look at things like depicted by. I can switch and say, well, let's start from here. Let's start from this one on the family tree. Get a little description and say, show the tree from here. And then I can say, show me some significant events. Oh, well, it turns out that the son of Hugo Pearls was involved in Menzel v. List, the landmark restitution case, as a defendant. And if we go back to family tree, and look at, start it from Frank Pearls, show the tree from here. We'll see that Frank Pearls is the dealer, one of the dealers who sold a painting that's at the heart of the lawsuit, David Cassera and Tyson, and so on. And so when you're doing a query and you're looking for patterns, you would want to take every member of the family dynasty in an art dealing dynasty in order to get a real picture of what's going on. It's possible in Wikidata to get all kinds of family trees. This is, for example, a sparkle query where you get the relations to, in this case, it's a significant people, to Gurlitt. So you would then use this to go further in your research. I've tried to collect a few queries that can be useful for you and to give an idea of the different kinds of things that you can see in these queries. As you see, there's quite a few of them. So we've seen artwork owned by at least one red flag name by Silverberg. Let's take art dealers, collectors, museum directors with significant event of Aryanization or a claim for restitution. Let's see what that looks like. So you can run these queries. And these are people who are linked to Aryanization or a claim restitution. And you can modify these queries. You could go to the Sparkle, and let's say that this just had art historians and a few professions, but you wanted to add more. You could add more to the unions, for example, or add more information to it. So I encourage you all to explore a little bit the library of queries. There is very likely one that could help you and that you can modify for your own use. Now, we've talked a little bit about data visualizations, which, given the quantity of information and the complexity of it, is a major challenge. But Wikidata provides incredibly rich information. So the problem is less to get the information than to figure out how to visualize it. So this one, for example, very interesting query. It's paintings owned by family and business connections to president of the Swiss Art Dealers Association. If I run the query, it looks like this. Very simple query. Connections, significant person, father, mother, sibling, etc. to the Swiss Art Dealers president, and I want to know who else owned them. And so we get 285 results, and when we look at it in the native graph functions of Wikidata, already it's not bad. It's pretty good. We're seeing the relations to the presidents of the Swiss Art Dealer Association and some of the paintings that they owned. But we can go further in the visualization to make it clearer. So this is that data put into chat with the simple prompt, please graph, pay attention to edges. Where you can see much more clearly the different people and their family relations. So for example, the presidents are in blue and the relations to them are in green, and the artworks are in yellow. We can do this with many other types of data to make it clearer. This is one that had to do with claims for restitution and which owners were involved and what the owners' relationships to each other were, which is a hard thing to represent in native graph functions of Wikidata, but you can take the data and inject it into another data visualization to make it much clearer. These are just a couple more examples. This is provenance for a single item. This, I was looking to understand the role of certain red flag names in the acquisition of artworks that went through Morton D. May to various museums, especially the St. Louis Museum of Art, but also the National Museum, I think in Sweden, and other places where there were restitution cases. And this is based on information from Wikidata, but presented as a flowchart with the help of AI. Now, a very important thing that you can do with Wikidata, because you know who people were in relation to the Holocaust, is you can pipe this data in to programs or tools that will check names and provenances of museum collections. There are ways to very quickly know which artworks in a museum collection contain red flag names, persecuted Jewish collectors, or names in between. And that will be the object of a separate presentation where we can look at how one can code this and share the code, for example, in Google Colabs or in other tools. This is just to give you an idea of what a query looks like that will give you a single column with status, depending on whether the person's a red flag name, Nazi Party member, Jewish collector, or several things at once. So what are some of the tips I can give you when using Wikidata queries to track looted art? One is to think of Wikidata as a component in a much larger looted art data ecosystem, and to be very aware of what's missing from Wikidata and where to find it. Wikidata queries can accept inputs from elsewhere and create outputs for analysis in other systems, and it can act as a hub to access provenance and other information at its source. Think data pipelines. Be pragmatic. If you're running a complicated query and it times out, or if you're trying to run a federated query and it times out, there's usually another solution. There are workarounds to get at the same information. Anything in Wikidata can be queried. Anything that is put in can be gotten out, including complicated things like qualifiers and references. The things like stated in, URL, and quotations. All of that can be queried. And if you don't know how to do it, if you want to modify a query or enhance it, now we have the possibility of pasting the query into chat with the prompt, please add such and such to the query. It's possible to visualize the patterns of extended networks. Thanks to Wikidata queries, you can see the itineraries and fates of not just the persecuted Jewish collectors, but their families, both during the Holocaust and after. You can identify the intermediate networks, or the laundering networks, between red flags and current possessions. And you can structure the data in news articles, scholarly texts, and legal documents, and link those documents to the various people mentioned. You can visualize changes of ownership in the timeline. The Wikidata queries offers contextual information for museums and researchers about artworks' owners. And you can connect out to custom wiki-based projects like the Jewish Digital Recovery Project via federated queries, enriching both. You can also monitor projects to see how complete they are and how well they're doing compared to what's in Wikidata. So for example, when you see how few red flag names have been properly coded in other systems, that's information that can be acted on. Thank you.